country, the land on which I am joining from today, and also acknowledge traditional custodians of the lands others are joining from. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples joining us today. And that image you can see on the screen is actually a photo taken from the highest vantage point of the Wadi Wadi track down near Stanmore Park. Absolutely beautiful area, and I highly recommend that track. Moving on. Now, as an overview for today, so the main content of this webinar is to share the steps that LGP is taking to reduce modern slavery risks in local government supply chains and how they can apply to you and your council. I'll also give you an overview of what we know so far from the New South Wales Anti-Slavery Commissioner's Office in relation to guidance. And given that there is probably likely to be differing levels of knowledge amongst the audience, I'll start with an overview of what modern slavery is, just to get us all onto the same level. And then we'll conclude with a Q&A session at the end. Now, as a bit of housekeeping, to prevent any accidental disruption, we have muted mics and disabled cameras for all attendees. If you have questions, please use the chat box throughout the webinar, and I'll respond to them during the Q&A session we have at the end. This webinar is being recorded, and that recording will be uploaded to the LGP website for you to access in the future. Once that is uploaded, we will email you the link. It's moving on. So, what is modern slavery? So, modern slavery is a severe exploitation of people for personal or commercial gain. So, it's situations of exploitation in which a person cannot refuse or leave because of threats, violence, coercion, deception or abuse of power. It's not just someone being underpaid, although if you do come across situations like that when you're engaging with suppliers, that could be an indicator that modern slavery might be somewhere within their business or their supply chain, but it's not, that on its own doesn't constitute modern slavery. Now, updated statistics from the Global Slavery Index, which were released in May, indicate that the occurrence of modern slavery globally is increasing. There are now an estimated 50 million people enslaved worldwide, and between 1,500 and 15,000 of those are estimated to be in Australia, with between 600 and 6,000 in New South Wales. The Anti-Slavery Commissioner has had around 600 cases reported to him, and because of the nature of those individual cases, it is likely that it extends more to a lot more than just that 600, and that's why we've got that indication of it could be as high as 6,000. Now, the most common form of modern slavery found in Australia is forced labour. So you can see here on the screen the different types of modern slavery that there are. Now, this forced labour is the one that you most commonly find in Australia, and that is any work or services where people are forced to do it against their will under the threat of punishment. So this has been particularly identified in Australia in the construction industry, the agricultural sector, and cleaning and domestic services and security. And those that are typically affected are migrants and those on working visas and bridging visas, which is like your 457 visa. So it's important to have an idea of where your suppliers are getting their subcontractors from and their workforce, because if they do fall under this demographic, then that can be a red flag. Now, some industries and products have higher modern slavery risks than others. And those industries that are globally recognised as having high risks are domestic work, construction, manufacturing, cleaning services, agriculture, forestry, and fishing. The industries at greatest risk of using forced labour in Australia have been identified as the agricultural sector, construction, cleaning services, domestic work, security and meat processing, as well as some in hospitality and food services. So it's quite across quite a broad range of sectors there. Products that are globally recognised as having high risks are cotton, bricks, garments, and electronics. So electronics such as laptops, computers, and mobile phones. Included in the top 5 products at risk of modern slavery imported by Australia are garments and electronics. So they're 2 products that councils generally would have quite high spends on. In terms of high-risk countries, these first 10 countries you can see, that is where they are the countries that have the highest prevalence. So that's the greatest proportion of population living in slavery. The next 10 countries are those countries that have the largest estimated numbers of people in slavery. And collectively, these countries account for nearly 2 in every 3 people living in modern slavery and over half the world's populations. So it's important to be mindful, and red flags go up when you ask the questions of suppliers around which countries they do source the products that you are buying from. So that concludes the brief overview of modern slavery itself. And now I'll move on to the legislative requirements for councils in relation to modern slavery. So legislative requirements. We do have a New South Wales Modern Slavery Act and Amendment Act. However, the requirements for local councils have been built into the Local Government Act. And here they are here. So I've just copied and pasted this straight out of the legislation so you can see exactly what it looks like and the sections that it's in. And those requirements are that a council must take reasonable steps to ensure that goods and services procured by and for the council are not the product of modern slavery. And that's within the meaning of the New South Wales Modern Slavery Act. So that's along the lines of the definitions that I've already presented you with. And then the other requirement is that a council's annual report must contain a statement of those steps taken or the action taken by the council in relation to this legislative requirement. And then if there is anything specific that the Anti-Slavery Commissioner has also asked for, that's specific action, then that needs to be included in that report as well. Okay. So now we get back down to what LGP is doing to help councils navigate through this. And we're doing a number of things, and we've been doing things for quite a while leading up to this legislative change because we saw it coming. So we are including modern slavery criteria in all RFTs for our contract panels, and we're starting to weight that criteria particularly for higher risk categories. And we're including clauses in the standing offer deeds underneath those panels. And those clauses include things like the approved contractors must participate in the annual risk assessment that we undertake. They must notify LGP if any modern slavery is found in their operations or supply chain, and they must report to us on what remedy measures they have put in place. Now, we are also doing annually modern slavery risk assessment against our contracts. I'll go into this all of the next 3 in more detail. We've got the Modern Slavery Toolkit that many of you probably already have access to, and we have modern slavery awareness training. In terms of LGP's annual risk assessment, so we conduct an annual modern slavery risk assessment across all LGP approved contractors. And this happens in about November each year, and we usually have that completed. We try to have it completed by December, but realistically it's more like the end of January, because we want to capture as many of our approved contractors under that risk assessment as possible. So we often have to give them more time to complete it. So what happens is that we send out a survey to collect the information. Now the survey questions align with the Commonwealth's Modern Slavery Act and what's required of reporting entities under the Australian requirements for Australian modern slavery statements. This survey goes to all our approved contractors, regardless of their size or capacity in other circumstances, because this doesn't change the responsibility for them to do some assessment and address their modern slavery risks. The survey questions and data analysis have been developed and tweaked and tested over the years in a format that does not disadvantage a supplier, regardless of their size, sector, products or services. Now, what we do through this analysis is we assign modern slavery risk ratings to contractors based on the responses that they give us. So just a bit of a note here, we don't go out and audit suppliers. We base it all on them having given us the correct information, and we do ask them to sign off on that they have done that. And then, so we assign modern slavery risk ratings to them as either high, moderate or low. We also have a risk rating of no response, and we suggest that when using a supplier with a no response risk rating, you treat them with the same level of caution as you would as a supplier who has a high risk rating. And you can see on the screen those little icons there, those 4 icons. So these icons are actually visible in vendor panel as supplier intelligence badges. And you can see those supplier intelligence badges against the suppliers when you're accessing LGP contracts in vendor panel and creating an RFX underneath a contract. So once you've selected the categories and panels for your RFX, you'll be presented with that list of approved contractors who meet your requirements, and then you will see these SI badges assigned to each of those contractors. You can also use the view fill option to reduce the number of contractors according to their risk ratings. Excuse me. Now, when using these risk ratings, it's also important to consider the modern slavery risks associated with spend categories. So that's where we said which industries and categories were of higher risk. It's important to consider that in making purchasing decisions as well. So the risk rating assigned to the contractor is about the steps that they are taking to lower the risk of modern slavery occurring. But it doesn't say that the category of spend that they're in is at that risk. So, for example, if you're taking into account both of those factors, whereas spend category is typically considered low risk, a moderate risk supplier may be okay. You may consider that to be okay. Whereas if, it might be best to engage with lower risk suppliers where the spend category has a high risk behind it. Okay. Moving on. Now, in terms of this modern slavery risk assessment, we can also undertake this for councils on their suppliers. So we use our own methodology to risk assess a council's suppliers, and we can do that very cost effectively because we already have this process set up. And what a council will get out of that risk assessment is they'll get a report. It's an Excel report, and that provides you with the risk ratings of all of your suppliers, or those that have responded to the survey we send them, along with the categories of spend that the supplier fits under. And we also ask them what business size they are too, so you can see where they fit in terms of size, what sort of supplier you're dealing with. And this will help council know where their risks lie. So you can use this information to undertake targeted supplier engagement and risk management. So this might include an analysis of where and which suppliers you have your highest spend, where that sits, and then you can see what the risks are associated with your highest spends. You can target moderate and high risk suppliers, particularly in higher risk categories. So, if undertaking reasonable steps when it comes to modern slavery isn't just about going, okay, you're a high risk supplier, I'm not going to deal with you. It's about engaging with that supplier, collaborating with them and working with them to try and reduce those risks together. So that's where you can use this information to then target those specific suppliers and determine how you can continue to work together if you can. You can also then target those suppliers to issue supplier code of conducts and also monitor compliance against that as part of your contract management activities. And include, if you wish, modern slavery KPIs as well. Now, LGP does do our risk assessment. We refresh it every 12 months. The council doesn't necessarily need to do that. They could do that by just targeting those specific suppliers that have come out as moderate and high risk. And the information that you will also help you to be able to develop a management plan to try and lower the risks associated with these targeted suppliers. And we can, for all of that additional activity that you can do from the outcomes of this risk assessment, we can also help you with that if you need assistance there. We also have developed a council modern slavery toolkit, which many of your councils have already purchased access to. So this is a toolkit where you purchase access once, so it's $800 plus GST. So you pay that once, and that gives you access to current resources as well as additional resources that we do add to it, and as we update things too. So it's just a one-off access fee, and then it's ongoing. So these are the resources that we currently have within the toolkit. So you've got fact sheets that address raising awareness within council, of modern slavery. There's also a policy template, and that is either you could use that template as to have a standalone policy, or you could draw out the clauses within that to include in existing policies. There's a supplier code of conduct template, and that also covers things like environmental issues, as well as local supplier. You're dealing with local suppliers as well and engaging local suppliers. There's modern slavery tender criteria and contract clauses. There's also a questionnaire that if you want to go out and or include it in your RFTs to ask questions of suppliers about what they're doing in terms of managing modern slavery risks. We have a pre-purchase modern slavery risk checklist in there. So that's before you even go to market. You can do this quick pre-purchase checklist just to get an idea of what sort of risk level you're at, what sort of risk level you're looking at through that purchase. There is a training PowerPoint template in there, and that has notes in there so that you can deliver training internally using that template. There's also a supply chain mapping and risk assessment template. And there we are in the process of working on a reporting template because we are at the stage where that first report is due in your annual reports by the end of this year. And, it's really important that that reporting template aligns with the expectations of the New South Wales Anti-Slavery Commissioner. So we've been speaking with him directly, and we're awaiting his further instruction. And he's also agreed that we'll provide him with a copy of the draft template for his feedback, so that we can really ensure that when we add that template to the toolkit, that if you follow that for your reporting, it will meet what the Commissioner is wanting in that first year of reporting. Other additional resources that we have in the planning are around guidance on working with moderate and high-risk suppliers and guidance on grievance mechanisms and remedial action. And there'll be some further information put in there regarding contracting and leverage. We also have a toolkit for SME suppliers that you may want to recommend to your SME suppliers. It's a smaller, watered down version of this toolkit, but it has in it what they need for their capacity and capability level. Next, in terms of modern slavery awareness training, so we do have that template in the toolkit, but LGP can also come and run that training for you. And that training includes things like what is modern slavery, what to look for to identify a possible victim of modern slavery. It also gives an overview of legislation, and then we'll tailor it to include an overview of what your council is doing in response to modern slavery and what the expectations and responsibilities of council staff are. Okay, so that ends all of the offerings we currently have available. So now I'm going to move on to talk a little bit about what's happening in the Anti-Slavery Commissioner's Office. Now I actually sit on the Procurement Working Group with the Commissioner, so I'm getting information through those sessions. So this is all around, the Commissioner is developing this guidance around what reasonable steps means in the legislation. He is yet to release this guidance. It's still being worked through, and there have been a few setbacks along the way because he's got a lot on, his office has a lot on their plate at the moment. But in terms of what he has said for this first year, he's really looking at policy. So in terms of councils having relevant policies in place and then having some mechanisms for how to implement that policy through the procurement process. So if you have access to the toolkit and you're utilising the documents in there, then you're covered for this. And he has specifically told me that that is the case, that he considers if you're following those through those resources, that you will meet the requirements for the first year. The Commissioner is also going to provide some guidance around leverage and using council's leverage to raise awareness with suppliers and encourage them to take action to reduce modern slavery risks, and also to put in place measures to detect modern slavery and provide remedies. So examples of commercial leverage are things like contracting and incentives. So that's your tender clauses and your RFT criteria, as well as those supplier questionnaires. and also awareness raising and trying to build capacity of suppliers as well. In terms of contracts and including modern slavery clauses in contracts and contract management, so the guidance around that is that the due diligence in terms of contracting arrangements really needs to come from both sides. So due diligence for a council means that contracts don't involve unrealistic delivery timeframes. A fair price is being agreed, and it doesn't involve unreasonable variations or termination clauses without regard of the impact to the workers in of that supplier and their sub-suppliers. In terms of contracting obligations for suppliers, they have obligations around engaging in responsible purchasing practices with their sub-suppliers or subcontractors, and providing notice to the council of potential actual modern slavery risks or incidents, and having a grievance mechanism in place to address and prevent and remedy any adverse modern slavery risks. The Commission is very much that, we're taking a risk-based approach to this. So this is identifying where the modern slavery risks lie and then putting in place appropriate measures to address those risks. Now, when these guidance around reasonable steps is published, it is likely to be included in the Office of Local Government Tendering Guidelines, which are currently under review, and the Commissioner's Office are speaking to OLG to have that guidance included in those tendering guidelines. So that's one location for all councils to access. In terms of what's expected of action of councils, the Commission is very aware that, there are different capacity and capability considerations that need to be factored in across the local government sector. He's very aware of that, and he is building his guidance around that, and there will be differing levels of action expected. How he determines the level of action and the capability or capacity of a particular entity, that's still yet to be determined. In terms of reporting, I'll let you know about that reporting template that we're developing, but essentially in the first year, reporting will need to focus mainly on policy and possibly on what's being done in relation to one high risk category, which is likely to be IT. In terms of that IT category, if you're utilising LGP's ITC contract and using those risk ratings when engaging with suppliers, then you have that covered. Now, in terms of modern slavery risk assessment, I'll very quickly go over this because we're going over time, but the Commissioner's Office, in terms of guidance around modern slavery risk assessments, he takes this funnel approach. So that's where you have this, funnel of suppliers, they all go in at the top, and there's an initial risk assessment done or inherent risk assessment. So that is focused just on categories and the risk associated with that spend category. And the Office of the Anti-Slavery Commissioner is developing an inherent risk identification tool that will be able to be utilised by all. That is still under development. It hasn't been released yet, but when it is, LGP will let you all know that it has been, and we'll send you a link to where you can find that. You then, after doing that, you go into further supplier due diligence, and that's where your supplier questionnaires come into place, and that is where the risk assessment and risk ratings that LGP has done against LGP contracts comes into place as well. That's where that fits in there. And then you move on to looking at engaging with higher risk suppliers and managing those suppliers, and they are both resources that we're looking at or planning on developing to be included in that toolkit that we have. Okay, that leads us to the end of the information part of it. I hope you've all found that useful. And now we have some short time available for some questions. Mihaela, do we have questions? Afraid I can't hear you. Sorry, Mihaela.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
All right. So we have 6 questions. The first
Yep.
one is from Craig Taylor. Will this slide presentation be available after the session? I would like to share this with council staff who procure goods, services, and works as to why this is an appropriate issue.
Yes, definitely. We can do that. We will, once the recording is available, we'll send you out a link to the recording along with a PDF of this slide deck.
Second question is from Monica Schulze. Is the risk assessment of council supplies distributed to all New South Wales councils or only to the councils who have the toolkit?
Yes, so I'm assuming this is the risk ratings and the risk assessment against LGP approved contractors. That's available for all New South Wales councils that when you're purchasing through LGP contracts. And if you are, when purchasing through LGP contracts, that means that you don't need to go and send out a supplier questionnaire relating to modern slavery to them because they've already filled that in. So that will also help in terms of, you know, suppliers are likely to get these sorts of questionnaires all the time. But if they are, if you are using the LGP contracts, it means that you don't have to then go and ask them that question again.
Another question from Carly Sembala. Are the new resources emailed out or do councils log in somewhere to access these documents, i.e. modern slavery statement template?
Yeah, so whenever we add resources to the toolkit, we will email everybody who has access to that toolkit and let them know that those new resources are there. So and similarly also if resources are being updated, when they're updated, we'll also send out a notification that they've been updated so that you know to go back in and access them again.
Another question, this one is from Alicia Lischke. With regards to the Act, can you clarify the requirement of the annual report detailing the difference between reasonable steps and taking actions? Taking actions being council procedural steps or action against suppliers?
No, so this is action in terms of taking reasonable steps to ensure that you're not procuring goods of modern slavery. And that is around your procedural steps and how you engage suppliers. It's not about taking action against suppliers, no. It's more around how you are addressing the risks, and you can, if you have had to take action against suppliers, then you certainly can include that. But I also want you to note that if you are identifying potential or actual modern slavery occurrences, then that should be reported, and that is to be reported to Border Force. So, or directly to the Office of the Anti-Slavery Commissioner if that's happening and you see that. So no, the reporting is around the steps that council has taken. If that includes taking action against suppliers, include that. If not, no, that's not what it's meant to be. It's more around the procedure and the steps and actions that you're taking to address the risks.
Okay, the next question is from Angela D. Is there a way to find out if our council has paid that one-off toolkit fee? I would not be 100% sure who to check this information with internally. Governance, finance, we don't have a dedicated procurement officer. And the second question from Angela, is there a fee for the SME toolkit?
Yes, so this second one, there is a fee for the SME toolkit. It's only $250 plus GST, and that is really similar to the council toolkit. It's really just to cover our costs so that I can keep operating and they can keep employing me here. So in terms of to find out if your council has already paid for it, please, and I'll just put contact details up there. Please email me at sustainablechoice@lgp.org.au and I can easily check that for you, and I can let you know who in your council made that purchase and has access to it, and we can give you direct access to the resources as well.
Okay, and the final question from Nikki Bevan. Is the policy a standalone policy or can it be part of the procurement policy?
Either. So we've got it set up as a standalone policy template, but the wording in that can easily be extracted to be part of your overall procurement policy, so that you include modern slavery within there. Either of those are acceptable, and they both really have the same outcomes.
That's it. No more question in the chat.
That's it. No more questions. Okay, so if that's no more questions, we'll end it there. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and I hope that you found that very useful. As I said, we will be distributing a link to the recording once it's uploaded to the website. We'll also send you a copy of this slide deck. And please contact us at that sustainablechoice@lgp.org.au if you have any further questions or you want any further guidance. And thank you very much for attending today.